My stepmother's hand still burned on my cheek as she snatched the envelope of cash, thinking she had finally broken me. But while the room went silent, my phone buzzed against my leg. The crypto wallet they had all laughed at had just exploded in value. She thought she was taking my last dime, but I was staring at a notification that meant I could buy this entire house and kick them all out into the snow. My name is Harper Lawson, and if you looked at my personnel file at Northline Analytics in downtown Denver, you would see a portrait of stability. I am 29 years old, a senior data analyst who spots trends in chaotic numbers that others miss, and I pay my taxes on time. But standing on the front porch of my father's house in the sprawling suburbs, brushing fresh snow off my shoulders, I felt like a fraud. The wreath on the door was the size of a tractor tire, dusted with fake frost and intertwined with velvet ribbons that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. It was the perfect entrance to the perfect home, but my stomach was already tying itself into knots. I knew exactly what awaited me inside, and it was not the warmth of family, it was an audit. I pushed the door open and was immediately hit by a wall of heat and the overpowering scent of cinnamon pine cones. The house was staged like a magazine spread. My father, Greg Lawson, sat in his leather armchair near the fireplace, swirling a glass of scotch. He was nearing 60 and had been unemployed for 2 years, ever since the sales firm let him go. But you would never know it by looking at him. He wore a cashmere sweater and held his chin high, maintaining the delusion that he was still the captain of industry he claimed to be in the 90s. Then there was Vanessa. My stepmother swept into the hallway before I could even take my boots off. She was over 50 but fought it with every expensive cream and procedure available. Her blonde hair coiffed into a rigid helmet of perfection. She was wearing a red silk dress that looked tailored, and her smile was as bright and hard as a diamond. "Merry Christmas, Harper," she said, leaning in for a hug that involved no actual contact. "You are late. We were worried you would miss the appetizers." "I am right on time." "Vanessa," I said, checking my watch, "it is exactly 6 o'clock." She waved her hand dismissively, the diamond bracelet on her wrist catching the light of the chandelier. "Well, come in. Do not just stand there letting the cold in." I hung my heavy wool coat on the rack by the door. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. Inside the inner breast pocket of that coat was a thick white envelope. It contained $3,000 in $100 bills. It was a discretionary performance bonus my boss had handed me just yesterday, separate from my direct deposit check, a little old-school reward for a massive project I had closed. I had already mentally allocated every cent of it. $2,000 would go to my student loans, and the last $1,000 was for me, just for me. It was the beginning of an emergency fund I had been trying to build for 5 years. I patted the pocket once to make sure it was secure, then followed Vanessa into the living room. The tree was a 12-foot monster, dragging under the weight of glass ornaments and silver tinsel. It was beautiful, and it made me sick. I knew how much debt this family was in because I was usually the one paying the interest on it. Dinner was an elaborate affair. Roast beef, truffled mashed potatoes, expensive wine. The conversation stayed shallow for the first 20 minutes. Vanessa talked about the neighbors, about how the homeowners association was being difficult about her holiday lights, and about how busy she was with charity work that I knew she only did for the social climbing. Then came the pivot. I knew it was coming. It always happened after the second glass of wine. "So, Harper," my father said, leaning back and looking at me with glazed eyes. "How is Northline? We hear the fintech sector is booming this quarter." "It is fine, Dad," I said, focusing on cutting my meat. "Steady work?" "Steady is good," Vanessa chimed in, her voice dripping with sugary intent. "We are so proud of you. It is such a relief to know one of our children is so financially stable." Speaking of which, Greg and I have been looking at our calendar for January. The Pearsons and the Millers are organizing a couple's trip to Aspen. "Aspen," I repeated, keeping my voice neutral. "That sounds nice." "It is going to be magnificent," Vanessa gushed. "First-class lodge, private skiing lessons, the works. It is important for your father to maintain his network. Harper, you know how business works. You have to be seen to be remembered. But, of course, with the market being so volatile, our liquidity is a little tied up right now." I stopped eating. There it was. "We were thinking," Vanessa continued, staring straight at me, her eyes unblinking, "since you have had such a good year, and since we have supported you so much through college, it would be a lovely gesture if you could sponsor the trip. It is only about $10,000. $10,000, I said. It was not a question. "I do not have $10,000 to pay for a vacation." "Vanessa." My father's face hardened. He set his glass down. "Do not lie." "Harper, we know what senior analysts make. You are single. You live in that small apartment. What could you possibly be spending your money on?" "Student loans. Dad, the ones you promised to pay and then forgot about. Rent, utilities, savings." "Savings," Greg scoffed, as if I had said something obscene. "You are hoarding money while your family struggles to maintain their dignity? That is selfish." "Harper." I decided to pivot before I lost my temper. I reached for my bag. "I brought gifts. Let us do gifts." We moved to the tree. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. My stepbrother, Logan, had finally joined us from the basement. He was 22, playing video games all day, and wearing a hoodie that cost more than my car insurance. He barely nodded at me. I handed out my gifts, for Dad, a vintage-style record player he had mentioned wanting months ago; for Vanessa, a high-end spa set; for Logan, a new gaming headset. They were not cheap gifts. I had spent carefully, thoughtfully. Vanessa opened hers, glanced at the label, and set it aside with a tight smile. "Cute," she said. "Thank you. Harper." Then she stood up. "Well, we have a surprise for Logan." She reached behind the tree and pulled out a silver box. Logan ripped it open. Inside was a car key. "We are leasing the new Land Rover for you." "Sweetheart," Vanessa cooed, "you need a reliable vehicle to get to interviews." "And," she added, pulling a thick envelope from her pocket, "here's a little walking around money for the holidays." She handed Logan a stack of cash that looked like at least $500. My jaw tightened. They had no liquidity for bills, but they had credit for a Land Rover and cash for the golden child. Then Vanessa turned to me. She did not have a box. She did not have a card. She just had a look of disappointment. "We did not get you anything big. Harper," she said, "we assumed that since you are doing so well, and since you refused to help us with Aspen, you would prefer to just keep your own money. That is your gift, your independence." I stood up. My hands were shaking. "I'm going to get a glass of water," I said. I walked toward the kitchen, needing to breathe. I passed the front hallway. I stopped. My coat was not on the rack. It was thrown over the banister, one sleeve inside out. My heart hammered against my ribs. I walked over and shoved my hand into the inner pocket. Empty. The $3,000 was gone. I turned around. Vanessa was standing in the archway of the living room, holding the white envelope. My envelope. She was tapping it against her palm, a look of victorious malice on her face. "I saw this fell out when I was moving your coat to make room for the guests," she lied smoothly. Her voice was loud enough for my father to hear in the next room. $3,000. Harper, you carry this kind of cash around while telling your father you cannot help him? "Give it back," I said. My voice was low, dangerous. She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "No, this is reimbursement. Consider it a down payment on the Aspen trip, or maybe rent for all the years you lived here for free. That is my bonus. Vanessa, I earned that. I need that for my loans." "You need to learn respect," she shouted, her mask finally slipping. I walked back into the living room. My father was watching, his face red from the scotch and the anger Vanessa had whipped up. "Dad, tell her to give me my money," I said. Greg looked at me, then at the envelope in his wife's hand. He shrugged. "You lied to us. Harper, you said you were broke. You are holding out on this family. You are a stingy, ungrateful child. You were born to help this family, not to hoard wealth like a dragon while we suffer." "I am not your ATM," I yelled. I was done. I was nearly 30 years old, and I was done being treated like a resource. I work 80 hours a week. I pay my own way. You bought Logan a Land Rover you cannot afford, and you are stealing my bonus? This is theft. Vanessa stepped forward, closing the distance between us. She was trembling with rage. How dare you? She hissed. How dare you speak to your father like that in his own house? You are a selfish little brat. She raised her hand. I saw it coming, but I did not flinch. I did not step back. The slap echoed through the room like a gunshot. It was hard. Her rings caught my cheekbone, and the sting was immediate and hot. My head snapped to the side. Silence descended on the room. The Christmas music seemed to stop. I slowly turned my head back to look at her. My cheek was throbbing, burning as if it were on fire. I could feel the heat radiating from the skin, but my eyes were dry. There were no tears. I was not the scared 15-year-old girl who used to hide in her room anymore. Vanessa stood there, breathing heavily, clutching my $3,000 in her left hand, her right hand still raised slightly as if she might strike again. I looked at my father. He did not look shocked. He looked satisfied. He looked like he thought I deserved it. Logan was sitting on the sofa, looking uncomfortable, staring at the floor. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. My cousin Maddie, who had arrived quietly while we were arguing and was sitting in the corner armchair, was holding her phone up. She was 19, obsessed with social media, and she froze when our eyes met. The little red recording light on her screen was solid. She had not just been texting, she had been filming a story for her feed. She had captured the screaming, she had captured the theft, and she had captured the slap. I looked back at Vanessa. She was adjusting her silk dress, composing herself, thinking she had won. She thought the physical pain would make me crumble, would make me apologize and beg for forgiveness just to keep the peace. She had no idea that the peace was gone. I stood there, the taste of copper in my mouth from where my tooth had cut my lip. I touched my cheek. "Keep the money," I said. My voice was steady, terrifyingly calm, even to my own ears. Vanessa blinked, confused by my lack of hysterics. "I will," she spat. "It is the least you owe us." I nodded slowly. I looked at the giant tree, the pile of gifts for Logan, and the woman who had just assaulted me. I reached into my pocket for my phone. I was going to call a cab. I was going to leave. But as I pulled the screen to life, a notification blocked my background image. It was from my crypto portfolio app, an alert I had set months ago and forgotten about because it seemed so impossible. Aurora chain, AUR, exceeds target threshold. Current value, up 4,000% in 24 hours. I stared at the number. I blinked. Sure, I was seeing things due to the concussion of the slap, but the number stayed there. The digits were long, very long. My father was saying something about me needing to apologize before I left, but his voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. I looked up from the phone. I looked at Vanessa, clutching the $3,000 like it was a fortune. She thought she had stripped me bare. She thought she had taken my power. She had absolutely no idea that while she was stealing my bonus, I had just become the richest person in the zip code. The stinging heat on my cheek began to cool, but the cold realization in my chest was just starting to freeze over. That slap was not an accident. It was not a momentary lapse of judgment or a sudden burst of holiday stress. As I stood there, looking at the people who were supposed to be my family, the last 14 years of my life suddenly rearranged themselves in my mind. I had been telling myself a story about duty and love for over a decade, but standing in that foyer, I finally saw the story for what it really was. It was a long con, and I was the mark. My memory rewound to the year I turned 15. My mother had passed away in the spring, leaving behind a silence in our house that felt heavy enough to crush bones. I was drowning in grief, trying to figure out how to be a teenager without the one person who understood me. My father, however, did not mourn. He recalculated. Less than 11 months after the funeral, Vanessa moved in. She brought her luggage, her expensive taste in curtains, and her son, Logan. I remember the first official family dinner we had together. It was at an Italian restaurant that was slightly too expensive for our budget, but Vanessa insisted we needed to celebrate our new beginning. I was picking at my pasta, feeling like an intruder in my own life, when Vanessa clinked her spoon against her wine glass. She smiled at me, that same tight, curated smile she was wearing right now in the living room. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her nails were manicured to sharp points. "We are a new family now," she had announced, "and we all have our roles. Logan is our little artist, so sensitive and free, and Harper." She paused for effect, looking at my father. "Harper is the smart one. She has a head for numbers, just like you. Greg, she is going to be the rock, the one who makes sure this family stays secure." It sounded like a compliment. At 15, desperate for approval and terrified of losing my father to this new woman, I took it as one. I straightened my back. I wanted to be the rock. I wanted to be valuable. I did not realize then that she was not giving me a compliment. She was drafting a contract. She was assigning me the role of the provider so that her son could play the role of the beneficiary. That unspoken contract followed me to university. While other students were partying or joining sororities, I was working 2 jobs. I waited tables at a diner during the night shift and worked as a library assistant during the day. I slept 4 hours a night. I ate instant noodles because fresh vegetables were a luxury I could not justify. Every month, the phone would ring. It was never a check-in to see if I was sleeping or if I was happy. It was always a crisis. "Harper, sweetheart," Vanessa would say, her voice trembling just enough to be convincing. "Your father is so stressed. The commission check was short this month, and if we do not pay the homeowners association fees, they are going to put a lien on the house. We just need $500, just to bridge the gap." I would look at my bank account. I would look at the money I had saved for textbooks, and I would send it. I always sent it. I told myself I was helping. I told myself that adults help their families. Meanwhile, I would see Logan's social media updates. He was attending a private liberal arts college 2 states away. He was driving a new sedan. He was going to music festivals. When I asked my father how they could afford Logan's tuition, but needed my tip money for the electric bill, the answer was always vague. "We make it work," Greg would say, his voice thick with false martyrdom. "We sacrifice for both of you." But the biggest lie was the student loans. That was the one that truly made my blood run cold as I stood there in the present day. When I got into college, my father sat me down and told me not to worry about the tuition. He said he would handle the paperwork. He said he was taking care of it as his duty as a father. I signed where he told me to sign, trusting him implicitly. It was not until I graduated that I found out the loans were entirely in my name. Federal loans, private loans, all of it. $80,000 of debt, anchored to my Social Security number. When I confronted him, panicked and crying, he just shrugged. "It builds your credit score, Harper," he had said, dismissing my terror as if I were overreacting to a spilled drink. "Besides, we spent our savings raising you. It is only fair you take on the cost of your degree." Yet, at every Thanksgiving, at every Christmas party, Vanessa would loudly tell the aunts and uncles how much they had invested in my education. She would sigh and say, "We just wanted Harper to have the best start in life, no matter what it cost us." And I would stand there, silent, suffocated by the truth I was too ashamed to speak. They used every weapon they had to keep me in line. The sharpest blade was always my mother. Vanessa learned quickly that invoking her name was the fastest way to open my wallet. If I hesitated to transfer money for a car repair or a vacation they could not afford, Vanessa would lower her voice to a whisper. "You know, your mother worked so hard to make this house a home. She would be heartbroken to think we might lose it because of a temporary cash flow problem. She would want you to step up. Harper, she raised you to be generous." It was emotional extortion. They held the memory of the woman I loved most hostage, demanding a ransom every few weeks, and I paid it. I paid it because I was terrified that if I didn't, I would be betraying her ghost. I became a ghost myself. I worked my way up at Northline Analytics, earning a salary that should have allowed me to travel. to buy a home, to live a life of comfort. Instead, I lived in a studio apartment the size of a shoebox. I drove a 10-year-old car with a rattling muffler. I wore clothes from discount racks. My coworkers thought I was incredibly frugal. They did not know I was funneling 30% of my income into a black hole in the suburbs. There was only one time I tried to say no. It was 3 years ago. My father had maxed out a credit card on golf clubs and a new home theater system, and the interest rate had spiked. He called me, demanding $3,000 to clear the balance. I told him I didn't have it. I told him I needed to fix my car brakes. The silence on the other end of the line lasted for 10 seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was not the voice of a father. It was the voice of a landlord evicting a tenant. "If you do not help this family when we are in need," Greg had said, ice dripping from every syllable, "then do not bother coming for Easter. Do not bother coming for Christmas. If you cut us off, you are cutting yourself out. Do not ever call this house your home again." That was the warning that branded itself into my brain. The fear of being truly alone, of having no place to go on holidays, of being an orphan in the practical sense, terrified me into submission. I transferred the money within the hour. I drove my car with bad brakes for another 6 months. I looked at them now, my father, swirling his scotch, avoiding my gaze. Vanessa, clutching my bonus money with a look of smug satisfaction. Logan, the golden boy, who had never been asked to sacrifice a single comfort in his life. I realized then that the slap was not a new behavior. It was just the first time Vanessa had used her hand instead of her words. She had been slapping me for 14 years. She slapped me every time she guilted me into paying a bill. She slapped me every time she lied about their finances. She slapped me every time she compared me to Logan. I had been their retirement plan. I had been their emergency fund. I had been their insurance policy. They did not love me. They loved the utility I provided. I was an appliance to them, a dishwasher that dispensed cash. But appliances break, and sometimes they short-circuit and burn the whole house down. The notification on my phone screen seemed to pulse against my palm. The numbers I had seen were not just digits. They were an exit strategy. For the first time in my life, I had leverage. I had enough money to walk out that door and never look back. I had enough money to ensure that their threat of cutting me off meant absolutely nothing because I no longer needed their shelter. A strange, cold calmness settled over me. It was the absence of fear. For years, I had been afraid of their rejection, but as I watched Vanessa gloat, I realized that their rejection was not a punishment. It was a liberation. I wondered, with a dark thrill running through my veins, what would happen to these parasites when the host finally detached itself? They had spent years bleeding me dry, confident that I would never stop the flow. They thought I was weak because I was kind. They were about to learn that I was my father's daughter after all. I knew numbers, I knew leverage, and I knew exactly when to close a bad account. My father cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Well," he grunted, looking at the floor, "you should probably sit down. Harper, we can forget this outburst if you just calm down and act like an adult." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a small, frightened man hiding behind a mortgage he couldn't pay and a wife he couldn't control. I am acting like an adult. Dad, I thought to myself, the kind of adult who audits the books and fires the embezzlers. The contract was void. The Bank of Harper was permanently closed, and the foreclosure on their comfortable, lie-filled life was about to begin. The heavy oak door of my father's house slammed shut behind me, muting the Christmas music and the shouting, but it could not silence the ringing in my ears. The cold winter air of Denver hit me like a physical blow, biting at the exposed skin of my face where Vanessa's handprint was still throbbing. I fumbled for my car keys, my fingers trembling not from the cold, but from a cocktail of adrenaline and rage that was coursing through my veins. I threw myself into the driver's seat of my 10-year-old sedan. The leather cracked and freezing against my legs. I locked the doors. It was an instinctual reaction, as if locking the car could keep the toxicity of that house from seeping back in. I jammed the key into the ignition and the engine sputtered to life. coughing a cloud of gray exhaust into the pristine suburban night. I did not look back at the house. I peeled away from the curb, my tires slipping slightly on the fresh snow before gripping the asphalt. I drove without a destination in mind, just needing to put miles between me and the people who shared my DNA. My phone, which I had thrown onto the passenger seat, began to buzz. It vibrated against the leather, a harsh, rhythmic sound that felt like an accusation. I ignored it for the first 5 miles. I focused on the road, on the way the headlights cut through the falling snow, on the sound of my own breathing. But the buzzing did not stop. It was relentless. Finally, I pulled into the empty parking lot of a 24-hour pharmacy about 15 minutes away from the house. The overhead lights hummed with a sickly yellow glow. I picked up the phone. 14 missed calls, 23 text messages. I opened the family group chat. It was a stream of consciousness fueled by panic and entitlement. My father, Greg, had sent the first volley. "You have done it now. Vanessa is hyperventilating. If she has a heart attack, that is on you. Harper, you come back here and apologize right now." Then Vanessa. 5 minutes later, "I cannot believe I welcomed you into my home and you treated me like a criminal. You are sick. You need help." Then Logan, my stepbrother, who had barely looked up from his video games all year. "Nice going. You ruined Christmas. Dad is crying. Hope you are happy. Psycho." I read the words, and for the first time in my life, they did not make me feel guilty. They made me feel nauseous. They were rewriting reality in real time. I was the one who had been slapped. I was the one whose bonus had been stolen. And yet, in their narrative, I was the villain because I had dared to leave. I was about to toss the phone back onto the seat when a different kind of notification popped up. It was from my bank, not the crypto app this time, but my regular checking account, the one I used to pay my rent and buy groceries. Alert. Large transfer initiated. My stomach dropped. I tapped the notification, my fingers moving frantically. I logged into the banking app, the Face ID taking a split second that felt like a year. The balance on the screen loaded. My savings account, which had contained exactly $4,500, money I had scraped together by skipping lunches and working overtime for the last 8 months, was gone. The balance read 0. I stared at the screen, blinking, thinking it was a glitch. I clicked on the transaction history. Transfer to Greg and Vanessa Lawson. Joint checking. Amount $4,500. Status pending. I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. They had not just taken the cash from my pocket, they had drained me dry. I dialed the bank's customer service number immediately, bypassing the automated menu with the desperate efficiency of someone who knows their livelihood is on the line. When a representative finally answered, I did not bother with pleasantries. "There is a fraudulent transfer on my account," I said, my voice shaking. "I did not authorize it. You need to stop it." The representative, a woman with a tired voice, tapped away on her keyboard. "Ma'am, I see the transfer here. It was authorized via telephone banking 40 minutes ago." The caller verified the security questions and provided the verbal passcode. I felt the blood drain from my face. The verbal passcode. It was the name of my first pet, a golden retriever named Buster, a dog that my father had bought for me when I was 6. Of course he knew the passcode. "That was not me," I whispered. "I did not make that call." "Well, the caller ID matched the number on file for your secondary contact." The representative said, "A Mr. Gregory Lawson?" I closed my eyes. He had called from his own phone, pretending to be me. Or perhaps Vanessa had called pretending to be me while he stood there. It did not matter. They felt so entitled to my resources that they did not even bother to hide their tracks. "Freeze the account," I said, my voice hardening. "Freeze everything, and mark that transaction as fraud. I am telling you, I did not make that transfer." "I will have to open an investigation," the woman said, sounding skeptical. "But if it is a family member—" "It is theft." I cut her off. "It is theft. Freeze it." I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of the cold car. The heater was blowing warm air, but I was shivering. A new text came in from Vanessa. Do not panic when you check your account. We just moved the money to safeguard it since you are clearly unstable right now. We will discuss your finances when you come back and apologize. We are doing this for your own good. I stared at the message. The audacity was breathtaking. They were gaslighting me about robbing me. They were framing grand larceny as parental concern. I looked out the window at the empty parking lot. A few hours ago, I was Harper the dutiful daughter, the endless well of support, the girl who just wanted to be loved. But that girl had died the moment Vanessa's hand connected with my face. I thought about Dr. Emily Rhodes, my therapist. We had spent the last 6 months talking about boundaries. She had used a term a few weeks ago, financial abuse. At the time, I had brushed it off. I thought financial abuse was something that happened to elderly people with dementia, or wives who were not allowed to work. I did not think it happened to successful data analysts in their late 20s. But as I sat there, looking at a zero balance in my savings account and a text message blackmailing me with my own money, the definition became crystal clear. They did not see me as a person. They saw me as an asset class, and like any asset, they believed they had the right to liquidate me whenever they needed cash. I picked up the phone one last time. I opened the group chat. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I could scream at them. I could beg. I could drive back there and bang on the door. That is what the old Harper would have done. The old Harper would have tried to explain, to reason, to negotiate her own value. But the new Harper? The Harper who had a crypto wallet sitting on a hard drive that was currently worth more than their entire mortgage? She did not need to negotiate. I typed a single message. Do not contact me again. I am auditing everything. I hit send. Then I did something I had never done before. I opened the settings on my phone and blocked my father. Then I blocked Vanessa. Then I blocked Logan. The silence that followed was instantaneous. No more buzzing. No more guilt, no more threats. I put the car in reverse. I was not going back to my apartment. They had a key to my apartment. For emergencies. I had told myself I could not risk them being there, waiting for an ambush. I drove to a hotel downtown, a generic business hotel with anonymous corridors and thick doors. I paid for a room with a credit card that I prayed had not been maxed out yet. When I got to the room, I sat on the edge of the bed. I did not turn on the lights. I just sat in the glow of the city outside the window. I opened my laptop. I connected the hardware wallet. I needed to see it again. I needed to know that I was not crazy, that I was not actually destitute. The number was still there. In fact, it had gone up. The volatility of the market was swinging in my favor. I looked at the two numbers side by side in my mind. The zero in my bank account, representing the family that had drained me, and the astronomical figure in my crypto wallet, representing the secret I had kept from them. They thought they had broken me tonight. They thought that by taking my $3,000 bonus and my $4,000 savings, they had leashed me tighter. They thought hunger and poverty would force me back to their doorstep, apologetic and compliant. They had no idea that they had just severed the only thing keeping me there, my hope that they would eventually love me. Now there was no hope. There was only math, and the math said that I had the capital to destroy them. I pulled up a new spreadsheet. I named it the ledger. My hands were steady now. The tears were gone. I began to type. I listed every loan they had forced me to take, every credit card bill I had paid, every emergency transfer. I did not have all the bank statements yet, but I had a memory like a steel trap. I was going to get it all back, not just the money. I was going to get back the years, the dignity, and the life they had stolen from me. The slap was the opening bell. The stolen savings was the declaration of war. And I was the only one in this fight who actually knew how to count cards. The fluorescent lights of Mark Hensley's office hummed with a low, electric buzz that usually drove me crazy. But today it was the only thing grounding me to reality. I was sitting in an ergonomic leather chair across from Mark, a man who wore suspenders without irony and treated tax codes with the reverence of religious texts. I had called him at 7 a.m, begging for an emergency appointment. To his credit, he had cleared his schedule. I need to see it all. Mark, I said, my voice sounding flat and unrecognizable to my own ears. I held a lukewarm cup of coffee that I hadn't taken a sip of yet. I want a forensic accounting of my life, every transaction, every transfer, every time I moved money from my accounts to anyone with the last name Lawson in the past 5 years. Mark looked at me over the rim of his glasses. He had been my financial advisor since I landed my first junior analyst role. He had always gently suggested I set boundaries with my family, but he had never pushed. Now, seeing the bruise beginning to bloom on my cheekbone, which I had tried and failed to cover with concealer, he didn't ask questions. He just typed. The sound of his mechanical keyboard was like gunfire in the small room. Click, 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 enter. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, staring at a framed diploma on the wall. I was numb. The rage from the night before had calcified into a cold, hard purpose. I wasn't here to cry. I was here to quantify the damage. Okay, Mark said softly. He hit one last key and leaned back. The printer in the corner whirred to life, spitting out page after page. It kept printing and printing. I watched the stack of paper grow. It was a physical manifestation of my guilt, my obligation, and my stupidity. Mark picked up the stack, stapled it with a heavy thud, and slid it across the mahogany desk. I have categorized them by recipient, he said. Greg, Vanessa, Logan, direct transfers, bill payments where you used your account routing number, third-party apps. I opened the dossier. The numbers blurred at first, but my data analyst brain kicked in, sorting the chaos into patterns. October 12th, rent assistance for Logan, $1,200. November 5th, medical emergency for Vanessa, $800. December 1st, heating bill for the house, $450. It went on, page after page of me bleeding myself dry to keep their lifestyle afloat. What is the total? I asked. I didn't look up. Mark hesitated. Harper, are you sure you want to? Give me the number. Mark. $253,482.16. The air left the room. I looked up at him. 250,000? I felt like I had been punched in the gut. That was a house, a down payment on a beautiful home in the Highlands. That was a master's degree. That was 5 years of vacations I never took, clothes I never bought, restaurants I never ate at. I sat there, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what I had given away. I had been eating instant oatmeal and worrying about the price of gas while I handed them $250,000. But Mark wasn't done. He wasn't looking at me with pity anymore. He was looking at his screen with a furrowed brow. He typed something else, frowned, and clicked his mouse rapidly. Harper, he said, his voice dropping an octave. While I was pulling your transfer history, I decided to run a soft pull on your credit report, just to make sure we had a comprehensive view of your liabilities. I nodded. Good. I want to see everything. You have your student loans, he said, pointing to a line on the screen, and your car lease, and your primary credit card. Correct. But, Mark paused, turning the monitor so I could see it. I am seeing 2 other credit cards issued by Chase and a personal loan from a credit union in Wyoming. I frowned. I do not have any cards with Chase, and I have never been to Wyoming. Mark didn't say anything. He just pointed to the billing address associated with the accounts. It wasn't my apartment in the city. It was 42 Maplewood Drive, my father's house. I leaned in, the text on the screen swimming before my eyes. Chase Sapphire Reserve, status, active, balance, $14,900. Chase Freedom Unlimited, status, active, balance, $9,200. Wyoming Valley Personal Loan, status, active, principal, $38,000. I did the math in my head instantly. That was over $60,000 of debt I didn't know existed. I stared at the transaction history on the Sapphire card. It was a catalog of indulgence. Aspen Ski Lodge deposit, $3,000. Nordstrom, $500. Best Buy, $2,000. Liquor World, $400. And the personal loan, The disbursement date was 2 years ago. The memo line simply said, "Vehicle financing." I remembered the day Vanessa surprised Logan with a new motorcycle for his 20th birthday. She had told me she won a small lottery scratch-off. I had believed her. I felt the room tilt. The walls seemed to close in. This wasn't just them asking for money and me giving it. This was different. "Mark," I whispered, "I didn't sign for these." "I know," Mark said grimly. "I didn't authorize this." "I know." Mark took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Harper, look at me. This is not a family dispute anymore. This is not them mooching off you. This is identity theft. This is wire fraud. These are felonies." The word felony hung in the air between us, heavy and ugly. "Identity theft," I repeated. My father, my stepmother, they hadn't just used me as a crutch. They had impersonated me. They had stolen my name, my credit, my future, and used it to buy designer jackets and premium cable packages. A wave of nausea rolled over me, hot and acidic. I thought I was going to throw up right there on Mark's expensive rug. I grabbed the edge of the desk, my knuckles turning white. I remembered the times I was rejected for a better apartment because my credit score was lower than it should have been. I remembered the interest rates on my car loan being astronomical. I had blamed myself. I thought I had missed a payment somewhere. I thought I was just bad with money. But I wasn't bad with money. I was being sabotaged. "Can you print it?" I asked. My voice was trembling, but underneath the tremor was a layer of ice. "I need you to print everything. Mark, the applications, the signatures, the monthly statements, everything." Mark nodded. He hit the print button again. While the printer churned out the evidence of my betrayal, my phone buzzed on the desk. It was Vanessa. "You are making a huge mistake. Harper, if you do not transfer the money back, your father is going to lose his mind. We could lose the house. Do you want that on your conscience? I am terrified for my health. Please, just come home and we can fix this." I looked at the text. Yesterday, that message would have sent me into a spiral of guilt. I would have called her, crying, apologizing for being difficult. But today, I looked at the text and then looked at the line on the credit report that showed a $400 charge at a luxury spa on the same day Vanessa had told me they couldn't afford groceries. I didn't feel guilt. I felt like I was reading a spam email from a stranger in a foreign country asking for my bank details. I swiped left. Delete. I gathered the papers. The stack was thick, heavy enough to kill a spider, or a reputation. "Thank you." "Mark," I said, standing up. He stood up with me. "Harper, what are you going to do?" "I am going to get a second opinion," I said. I walked out of his office and into the biting wind of downtown Denver. I sat in my car, the pile of evidence on the passenger seat next to me. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had only ever used for video calls. "Dr. Emily," I said when she answered. "I know we do not have a session scheduled, but I need 5 minutes." "Harper?" Her voice was warm, concerned. "Is everything okay?" "No," I said. I told her everything. I told her about the slap, the stolen bonus, the audit, the $250,000 in transfers, and the $60,000 in ghost debt. I told her about the credit cards sent to their house. I told her about the signatures that must have been forged. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. Then Dr. Emily spoke, and her voice was stripped of its usual therapeutic softness. It was sharp. "Harper, I want you to listen to me very carefully." "I am listening." "If a stranger did this to you, if a man you met at a coffee shop stole your wallet, forged your signature, took out loans in your name, and slapped you when you confronted him, what would you call it?" "I would call it a crime," I said. "And what would you do?" "I would call the police." "Exactly," she said. "The only difference here, the only variable that is confusing you, is that they share your last name. Biology is not a license for abuse. Theft is theft. Harper, assault is assault. They are not acting like parents. They are acting like predators." Predators! The word clicked into place like the final piece of a puzzle. They weren't my family. They were parasites who had groomed me to be their host, and they had gotten sloppy. They had gotten greedy. I looked at the stack of papers again. It wasn't just a sad story anymore. It was a case file. I hung up the phone. I started the car. I wasn't going back to the hotel. I was going to find a lawyer. And not just any lawyer. I needed someone who looked at a burning bridge and saw a tactical advantage. My crypto wallet was sitting in the hotel safe, its value climbing with every passing hour. I had the means. And now, thanks to Mark and the paper trail sitting next to me, I had the ammunition. I put the car in drive. The tears were gone. The daughter was gone. The plaintiff had arrived. The generic hotel room was silent, save for the hum of the mini-fridge and the furious clicking of my laptop trackpad. I sat cross-legged on the stiff mattress, the curtains drawn tight against the Denver morning. To anyone looking in, I was just a woman in a bathrobe staring at a screen. They would not have known that I was looking at the difference between slavery and freedom. I needed to go back, not to the house, but in my mind. I needed to retrace the steps that had led me to this moment, to the one decision I had made 6 months ago that my father and Vanessa knew absolutely nothing about. It had started in late spring. I had been sitting in my cubicle at Northline Analytics, staring at a variance report for a client, when a notification popped up from my personal bank account. It was an overdraft fee. Vanessa had guilt-tripped me into paying for an emergency dental procedure for Logan, which I later learned was actually cosmetic teeth whitening, and the transfer had hit my account before my paycheck cleared. I remembered the feeling of suffocation. I was a senior analyst. I made good money. And yet, I was living paycheck to paycheck because I was hemorrhaging cash to support 3 capable adults. I realized then that as long as my money was in a traditional bank, they would always find a way to get to it. They knew my banks. They knew my pay schedule. They knew my psychological triggers. I needed an offshore account, but I was not a millionaire with a Swiss banker. So, I turned to the one thing Vanessa called magic internet money for idiots. I spent 3 weeks researching. I did not look at the cartoons or the meme coins that Logan sometimes posted about on Twitter. I looked at the technology. I read white papers until my eyes burned. I looked for infrastructure, for utility, for something that solved a real problem in data processing. That was when I found Aurora Chain. It was boring. It was dense. It was a Layer 0 protocol designed to facilitate cross-chain data transfers for enterprise logistics. It was exactly the kind of unsexy, high-utility project that retail investors ignored but institutions eventually drooled over. I took $5,000, money I had made from a freelance consulting gig I had never told my father about, and I bought in. But I did not leave the coins on the exchange. I knew that if I left them on a website, I might be tempted to sell them the next time Vanessa cried about a mortgage payment. Or worse, if they ever guessed my passwords, which, as I had discovered today, was their favorite pastime, they could drain it. I bought a hardware wallet, a small black USB device that looked like a car key. I moved every single token onto it. Then came the hard part, the seed phrase, the 24 random words that were the only key to the funds. If I lost the device, those words could restore the wallet. If someone else got the words, they owned my money. I wrote the words down on a piece of heavy cardstock, but I did not just write them. I used a substitution cipher I had invented in middle school to pass notes to my friends. Apple became zebra, river became mountain. Unless you knew the key, the list looked like the ramblings of a madwoman. I needed a place to hide it. My apartment felt vulnerable. Vanessa had a spare key she refused to return. So, in a stroke of irony that I now appreciated, I hid it in the one place I knew nobody would ever look. I hid it in my father's house. Specifically, inside the dust jacket of a hardcover copy of The Wealth of Nations that sat on the high shelf of the study. My father liked having the book there to look sophisticated, but I knew for a fact he had never cracked the spine. It was the safest place in the world, hidden in plain sight, guarded by their own intellectual laziness. Flash forward to the hotel room. My phone had been buzzing all morning with price alerts. I had set a trigger on my portfolio tracking app. Notify if AUR exceeds $10. It had pinged at 4 in the morning, then again at 5. AUR exceeds $20. Then at 6. AUR exceeds $50. I had thought the app was glitching. Projects like this did not move that fast. But then I checked the news. A massive global logistics firm, one of the Fortune 500, had just announced a partnership with Aurora Chain to manage their entire supply chain database. It was the kind of news that turned a speculative asset into a standard. My hands were shaking as I reached into my bag and pulled out the hardware wallet. I had grabbed it from my apartment before driving to the hotel. It was cold and heavy in my palm. I plugged it into the laptop. I entered my PIN code. The screen refreshed. I stopped breathing. The number on the screen was not a phone number, but it looked like one. $5,000. That was my initial investment. The current balance was sitting just north of $280,000. And the chart was still pointing straight up. I sat back against the headboard, feeling a hysterical laugh bubbling up in my throat. I covered my mouth to suppress it. $280,000. It was enough to pay off the $60,000 in identity theft debt Mark had found. It was enough to pay off my student loans. It was enough to hire the most shark-like lawyer in Denver, and there would still be enough left over for a down payment on a condo where the concierge would never let Vanessa Lawson pass the front desk. I remembered the last Thanksgiving dinner. Vanessa had been drinking Chardonnay and lecturing me about my finances. "You waste your time on that computer," she had sneered, gesturing at my laptop. "Buying those fake coins. It is gambling. Harper, it is for people who are too lazy to work. If you had any respect for money, you would give it to your father to invest in something real." Something real, like the new patio furniture she bought 2 weeks later. They had mocked me. They had called me a gambler. They had called me stupid. And now, the stupid money was the only thing standing between me and total ruin. But as I stared at the screen, a darker thought intruded. I navigated away from my wallet interface and logged into the actual exchange website, the platform where I had originally bought the coins before moving them to cold storage. I went to the security tab. I wanted to make sure everything was locked down. I scrolled down to recent login activity. My blood ran cold. November 25th, 10:42 p.m., failed login attempt, IP address, Englewood, Colorado. November 25th, 10:45 p.m., failed login attempt, IP address, Englewood, Colorado. December 24th, 4 p.m., failed login attempt, IP address, Englewood, Colorado. Englewood. That was where my father lived. December 24th at 4 p.m. That was 2 hours before I arrived for the Christmas party. While Vanessa was arranging the appetizers and my father was selecting his tie, one of them had been sitting at the computer, trying to guess my password. They knew I had internet money. They didn't know how it worked. They didn't know about the hardware wallet, but they knew it had value. They had tried to rob me before I even walked through the door. I looked at the failed attempts. They had tried variations of my birthday, variations of my mother's name. They were hunting. If I had left those coins on the exchange, if I had been less paranoid, less careful, they would have taken it. They would have seen the value rise this morning, and they would have transferred it to their own accounts, claiming they were managing it for me. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just financial abuse. This was predation. They were actively hunting my assets. I closed the laptop lid, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had the seed phrase memorized now, but the paper copy was still in that book in their house. A spike of anxiety shot through me. Did they have it? I forced myself to think logically. Vanessa had cleaned the study last month. She had bragged about it on Facebook. If she had found the paper, she would have seen a list of random words: zebra, mountain, whisper, cobalt, so. To her, it would look like nonsense, or a vocabulary list. She didn't know what a seed phrase was. She didn't have the hardware wallet. Without the device or the knowledge of the cipher, the paper was just paper. But I couldn't risk it staying there, and I couldn't go back to get it. It didn't matter. As long as I moved the funds to a new wallet with a new seed phrase, The old one would be useless. I opened the laptop again. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I set up a brand new wallet. I generated a new seed phrase. I transferred the entire balance of Aurora Chain to the new address. The transaction fee was $12, a small price to pay to burn the bridge behind me. I watched the confirmation bar load. Processing. Complete. The money was safe. It was effectively on an island that no Lawson could ever reach. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for Nora Calder. The attorney Dr. Emily had recommended, a woman known in legal circles as the Barracuda. The receptionist answered on the second ring. Law offices of Nora Calder. How may I direct your call? I need to schedule a consultation with Ms. Calder immediately, I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice of a woman with $250,000 in liquid assets. I am afraid Ms. Calder is booked until mid-January, the receptionist said. Tell her I have a case involving complex identity theft, wire fraud, and a significant crypto asset recovery, I said, and tell her I can pay her retainer in full, in cash, today. There was a brief pause. Can you come in at 2 o'clock? I will be there, I said. I hung up the phone and walked to the window. The snow was still falling over Denver, blanketing the city in white. Somewhere out there in the suburbs, Vanessa was probably waking up, checking her bank account, expecting to see my transferred savings still sitting there, expecting me to come crawling back, begging for forgiveness. She didn't know that the game had changed. She was playing checkers with stolen pieces. I was playing 4D chess, and I had just promoted a pawn to a queen. Nora Calder's office was on the 42nd floor of a glass tower that looked down on Denver like a judgment seat. She was a woman who did not believe in soft lighting or comfortable small talk. She sat behind a desk made of reclaimed industrial steel, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. She was in her 50s, with silver hair cut into a sharp bob that looked like it could cut glass. They called her the Barracuda for a reason. I sat opposite her, pushing the heavy binder of evidence across the steel surface. It contained Mark's forensic accounting, the credit reports showing the $60,000 in fraudulent debt, and the printed logs of the failed login attempts to my crypto exchange account from my father's IP address. Nora put on a pair of thick-rimmed glasses and opened the file. The room was silent for 10 minutes. The only sound was the turning of pages and the occasional scratch of her pen on a legal pad. She stopped at the page detailing the unauthorized transfer of my savings the night of the party. She looked at the timestamp. She looked at the police report draft I had started but not filed. Then she closed the binder and took off her glasses. "Harper," she said. Her voice was low and gravelly, like a car engine idling. "You need to stop calling this family drama. This is not a dispute between a father and a daughter. This is a criminal enterprise operating out of a suburban living room." I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. To hear a professional say it out loud validated the madness I had been living in. "We have identity theft," Nora listed, ticking off fingers. "We have wire fraud. We have attempted grand larceny regarding the crypto assets. And based on what you told me about the physical altercation, we have assault. You are not a rebellious child. Harper, you are a victim in a felony case." I nodded. "I want to stop them. Nora, I do not just want the money back. I want to make sure they can never do this to me again." Nora smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was a shark's smile. "We will do more than stop them," she said. "We are going to dismantle them. But to do that, I need leverage. The financial documents are excellent, but juries and judges respond to narratives. Is there anything else? Any threats? Any admissions?" As if on cue, my phone buzzed on the table. I looked down. It was a text from my cousin Maddie. I hadn't spoken to her since I stormed out of the house. The text read, "I thought you should have this. I am sorry I didn't say anything at the time. I was scared." Attached was a video file. I pressed play. Nora stood up and walked around the desk to look at my screen. The video was shaky at first, framed vertically like an Instagram story. It showed the back of Vanessa's head and my father's red face. The audio was crystal clear. I am not your ATM. My voice in the video sounded desperate. Then, the frame shifted. Vanessa stepped forward. I saw her hand raise. The sound of the slap was sickeningly loud, a sharp thwack that made me flinch even watching it on a screen. The camera jolted as Maddie must have jumped. Then came the aftermath. Vanessa snatching the envelope from my pocket, and then the voice of my father, Greg Lawson, cutting through the silence. Your money is this house's money. Harper, do not be selfish. Nora hit the pause button. She stared at the frozen image of Vanessa clutching my cash. Send that to me, Nora said. Immediately. Save it to the cloud. Save it to a hard drive. Email it to yourself. That video is not just evidence. That is the nail in the coffin. That is proof of robbery and assault. And your father's statement proves conspiracy. He validated the theft in real time. I forwarded the file. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the realization that Maddie, the teenager obsessed with filters and likes, had just handed me the smoking gun. Now, Nora said, returning to her seat, we go on the offensive. For the next 2 hours, Nora and I built the war room. She instructed me to archive every text message, every email, every voicemail from the last decade. I sat there scrolling back through years of digital manipulation. I found the texts from Vanessa 3 years ago. If you do not pay this credit card bill, your father is going to have a stroke, and it will be your fault. I found the emails from Greg. I know you have your own life, but if you do not help us with the car payments, do not bother calling yourself a Lawson. Family sacrifices. Harper. Nora printed them all. She created a timeline of emotional coercion that matched the timeline of the financial transfers. It was a masterpiece of guilt weaponized for profit. Then, she started making calls. She contacted the fraud departments of Chase and the credit union in Wyoming. She didn't just report the cards as stolen. She filed sworn affidavits of identity theft, attaching the police report draft she had just finalized. She demanded an immediate freeze on all accounts opened in my name that were linked to the Maplewood Drive address. This is going to trigger some alarms. Nora warned me, when the credit card companies lock those accounts, the cards will stop working. Your father and stepmother are going to find out very quickly that the tap has run dry. Let them find out, I said. It didn't take long. 2 days later, I was sitting in Nora's conference room, reviewing the draft of the civil lawsuit we were preparing as a backup. My phone began to ring. It was Greg. Do not answer, Nora said. Let it go to voicemail. We need the recording. I watched the screen light up. Once, twice, 3 times. Then came the voicemail notification. Then a text from Logan. Mom is crying in the kitchen. Her card just got declined at the grocery store. What the hell did you do? Then a voice message from Vanessa. I played it on speakerphone. Harper, I do not know what kind of game you are playing, but this is cruel. I tried to buy food for this family and the machine said, refer to issuer. You need to fix this. You need to call the bank and tell them it was a mistake. We are your parents. Her voice cracked at the end, a performance worthy of an Oscar. Then, the big one came. My phone rang again. This time, the caller ID wasn't family. It was the fraud department of the bank where I held my savings account, the one they had drained. I answered this one, putting it on speaker. Ms. Lawson, this is the fraud detection unit. We are calling regarding the dispute you filed about the transfer of $4,500. Yes, I said. Well, we contacted the recipient bank to reverse the funds, and the account holder, a Mr. Gregory Lawson, is claiming that this is a misunderstanding. He's on the other line right now. Actually, he is quite agitated. He claims he had your verbal permission. I looked at Nora. She nodded. I leaned into the phone. There is no misunderstanding, I said, my voice cold and steady. Mr. Lawson does not have my permission. He used personal information to impersonate me and bypass your security protocols. That is a crime. If you do not return those funds and permanently block that account from accessing mine, I will be adding your bank to the lawsuit I am currently drafting with my attorney. There was a stunned silence on the other end. I see. The agent stammered. I will proceed with the reversal immediately. 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. It was Greg. He wasn't calling to guilt-trip me this time. He was calling because the bank had just told him the money was being clawed back. I looked at Nora. "Answer it," she said, "but put it on speaker and say exactly what I wrote down for you." I slid the green icon. "Hello, Greg," I said. "You ungrateful little traitor," he screamed. His voice was so loud it distorted the speaker. "I just got off the phone with the bank. You told them I stole from you? You reported your own father for fraud? Do you have any idea what you have done? You are humiliating us." I waited for him to stop screaming. I looked at the notepad Nora had pushed toward me. "I am not humiliating you, Dad." I read, "I am protecting myself. You committed identity theft. You stole my identity to take out $60,000 in loans. You stole my savings. You assaulted me." "That is a lie," he roared. "We raised you. We spent everything on you. That money is ours by right." Nora signaled for me to cut him off. "I have hired counsel. Greg, if you want to discuss this, you will do it through her. Do not contact me again." I hung up. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. It was the first time I had ever hung up on him, the first time I had ever set a hard boundary. Nora looked at me with approval. Good. Now they are scared. They know the money is gone. They know the credit cards are dead. They know the bank is investigating them. Panic causes people to make mistakes. She pulled out a calendar. "Next step," she said. "We invite them in." "Invite them?" I asked. "After all this?" "We send a formal letter," Nora explained. "We tell them that you are willing to discuss a settlement to avoid pressing criminal charges. We frame it as a mercy. We tell them that if they come to my office on Friday at 10 in the morning, we can resolve this like a family." "But we are not resolving it, are we?" I asked. Nora tapped her pen on the desk. "No. We are getting them into a room where they feel safe enough to admit what they did, while I have a court reporter recording every word. We are going to offer them a choice. They can sign a confession and a repayment plan, or they can leave my office in handcuffs." She looked at the video of the slap paused on her screen. "They think they are coming to bully you into submission one last time. Harper, they think they can talk you down because they have done it for 10 years. They have no idea that they are walking into a deposition." I looked at the window, at the snow falling on the city. I imagined Greg pacing in his kitchen, whiskey in hand, terrified of the financial ruin heading his way. I imagined Vanessa trying to spin this to her friends, realizing her lies wouldn't pay the bills. "Send the letter," I said. Nora smiled. "Friday at 10, she said. I picked up the file containing the crypto logs, my secret weapon. They didn't even know about the $250,000 sitting on my hardware wallet. They were fighting over scraps, while I was holding the keys to the kingdom. I was ready. The daughter who begged for approval was dead. The woman who was about to dismantle them was just getting started. The phone felt heavy in my hand, not because of its weight, but because of the gravity of the call I was about to make. I stood in the center of my hotel room, wearing a crisp navy blazer I had bought that morning. It was armor. I dialed my father's number. He answered on the first ring, breathless, likely expecting a groveling apology. "Harper, you finally came to your senses. Your mother is sick with worry." I did not let him finish his script. "I am done listening. Dad," I said. My voice was not loud. It was terrifyingly flat. "I am ready to talk about the money, but we are not doing it at the house. We are doing it on my turf." There was a pause. "What are you talking about?" 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, the law offices of Nora Calder, 17th Street. "Lawyer?" Greg laughed. A nervous, barking sound. "We do not need lawyers. We are family. Families do not sue each other." Harper. "Families do not steal $60,000 from their children in identity fraud schemes," I countered. The line went dead silent. I had used the specific legal term. "You have two choices," I continued. "You can show up tomorrow at 10 o'clock and we can discuss a civil resolution, or I can hang up right now and authorize Ms. Calder to file the criminal report we have already drafted with the Denver Police Department. I heard Vanessa's voice in the background, shrill and panicked. What is she saying? Is she bluffing? She is not bluffing, Greg whispered away from the receiver, but loud enough for me to hear. 10 o'clock, I repeated. If you are 1 minute late, the offer is off the table. I hung up before he could respond. The conference room at Nora Calder's firm was designed to intimidate. It was a glass box floating 40 floors above the city, with a table made of polished black granite that looked like a tombstone. I sat at the head of the table, flanked by Nora. I had my laptop open, the screen dark. A pitcher of ice water sat untouched. At exactly 9:58, the elevator doors slid open. They walked in like they were attending a funeral where they were the guests of honor. Greg wore his best suit, the one he used for interviews he never got. Vanessa was wearing large sunglasses and a fur-collared coat, clutching a designer bag I knew for a fact was paid for with my credit rating. Logan trailed behind them, looking like he wished he could dissolve into the carpet. He was wearing a blazer over a t-shirt, clearly thinking he was there to smooth things over. They entered the room. Greg immediately put on his salesman's smile, wide and fake. "Harper." "Sweetheart," he boomed, moving to embrace me. "This is all so unnecessary, but if it makes you feel better to have a mediator—" "Sit down, Greg," Nora said. She did not shout. She did not stand up. She just spoke with the absolute authority of a woman who charged $800 an hour. Greg froze. He looked at me, waiting for me to correct the rude stranger. I just stared at him, my face a mask of indifference. He sat. Vanessa sat next to him, taking off her sunglasses to reveal eyes that were red-rimmed but alert. Logan took the seat furthest away. "I want to introduce you to Ms. Calder," I said. "She is my attorney. Anything you say in this room is on the record." Nora opened a thick file folder. The sound of the paper hitting the granite was the only noise in the room. "Let us be clear about why we are here," Nora began. "This is not a family therapy session. This is a pre-indictment meeting regarding a series of financial felonies committed against my client." Vanessa scoffed, crossing her arms. "Felonies? You are being dramatic. We borrowed some money to keep the household running. Harper knows we are good for it." Nora ignored her. She slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a copy of the loan application from the Wyoming Credit Union. "Is this your signature, Mr. Lawson?" Nora asked. Greg squinted at it. "It looks like Harper's signature." "It is a forgery," Nora said. "A forensic handwriting analyst has already confirmed it does not match my client's signature on her driver's license or her employment contracts. However, it does match the handwriting on checks signed by you, Greg Lawson, from your joint account." Greg turned a shade of purple that clashed with his tie. "We needed a car. Harper was doing well. I intended to pay it back as soon as the market turned." "Intent does not negate fraud," Nora said. She slid another paper. "And these credit cards? $24,000 in charges, luxury items, trips, liquor." "That was for lifestyle maintenance," Vanessa burst out. "Harper benefits from our status in the community. If we look poor, it reflects badly on her." I spoke for the first time. "I do not live there, Vanessa. I pay my own rent. The only thing that reflects badly on me is the $60,000 of debt you attached to my Social Security number without my knowledge." Greg slammed his hand on the table. It made Logan jump. "We raised you," he shouted, the veneer of the nice guy vanishing instantly. "We put a roof over your head. We fed you. You owe us. You think you can just hoard your money while your parents struggle? That is not how this family works." It was the same speech I had heard 1,000 times. Usually, it made me shrink. It made me reach for my checkbook. Today, it just sounded like noise. Nora waited for the echo of his shout to die down. "Mr. Lawson, yelling will not change the statutes of Colorado state law. Identity theft is a Class 4 felony. Wire fraud is a federal offense." She signaled to me. I reached for the remote control on the table. A large monitor on the wall flickered to life. "I have one more piece of evidence," I said. You might remember this. It was filmed 3 days ago. I pressed play. The video filled the screen. The sound was crisp. I am not your 8. My voice rang out, desperate and pleading. Then, the slap. In the high-definition silence of the law office, the sound was brutal. It sounded like meat hitting a butcher block. Vanessa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Logan looked away, unable to watch. But the video continued. It showed Vanessa rifling through my coat. It showed her taking the envelope. And then, it showed Greg, his face twisted in anger, pointing a finger at me. Your money is this house's money. Harper. I paused the video on that frame. My father's angry face, frozen in high resolution, proving his complicity. The room was deathly quiet. That, Nora said, pointing her pen at the screen, is assault and battery. And that statement? That is an admission of conspiracy to commit theft. You are on camera claiming ownership of funds you just watched your wife steal. Greg looked at the screen. He looked at me. For the first time, I saw the bluster evaporate. He was not the powerful patriarch anymore. He was a man who had been caught on tape. He slumped in his chair, looking suddenly very old. Vanessa was shaking. She looked from the screen to Nora, then to me. The arrogance was gone. In its place was pure, unadulterated fear. You recorded us? Vanessa whispered. In our own home? My cousin recorded it, I said, because she was scared of you. Logan spoke up, his voice cracking. Mom, you told me she threw the money at you. You said she hit you first. Shut up, Logan, Greg snapped, but there was no heat in it. Nora closed the file. Here's the situation, she said. We have enough evidence to walk this binder over to the district attorney this afternoon. With the amount of money involved and the predatory nature of the identity theft, you are looking at mandatory prison time. 5 years minimum, maybe more. She let that sink in. However, she continued, my client is willing to offer you a lifeline, not because you deserve it, but because she wants to sever ties cleanly and immediately. We have prepared a settlement agreement, Nora said, sliding a thick document across the black granite. It requires a full admission of guilt regarding the fraudulent loans. It requires you to liquidate assets to pay back every cent of the debt you took out in Harper's name, and it requires a permanent no-contact order. Vanessa looked at the document as if it were a bomb. Liquidate assets? She stammered. We have no liquid assets. You know that. We know you own the house on Maplewood Drive, Nora said. Vanessa's eyes went wide. That is our home. It is an asset, I said, and it is the only way you are going to stay out of jail. Greg looked up at me. His eyes were wet. Harper, he pleaded, you cannot do this. You cannot make us sell the house. Where will we go? I looked at him. I remembered the years of guilt trips, the years of stolen wages, the way he watched Vanessa slap me and did nothing but demand my money. I do not know. Dad, I said, but you are resilient. You always told me to figure it out, didn't you? Harper, please, Vanessa sobbed. She reached across the table, trying to grab my hand. I pulled it back sharply. Do not touch me, I said. Read the agreement, Nora commanded. You have 20 minutes to decide. If you do not sign, we file the police report at 11 o'clock. The silence that followed was heavy with the sound of their ruin. Greg put on his reading glasses, his hands trembling so badly he could barely hold the paper. Vanessa was weeping into her hands, but they were the tears of someone who had lost the game, not someone who regretted the play. I sat back in my chair. I watched them read the terms of their surrender. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one afraid of the consequences. I was the one dictating them. Nora did not shove the document across the table. She placed it there with the delicate precision of a surgeon setting down a scalpel. The sound of the paper hitting the granite was barely a whisper, yet it seemed to echo in the room like a gavel strike. This is a binding settlement agreement and release of claims, Nora stated. Her voice devoid of any theatricality, it was pure procedural ice. It outlines the specific terms under which my client agrees to withhold filing a criminal complaint. with the Denver District Attorney's Office regarding the multiple counts of identity theft, wire fraud, and credit card fraud you have committed against her. Greg looked at the document as if it were radioactive. He did not reach for it. His hands were gripping the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles were white. "What does it say?" he rasped. Nora opened her own copy, adjusting her glasses. "Item 1, she read, you, Gregory Lawson, and you, Vanessa Lawson, admit to willfully and knowingly using Harper Lawson's personal identifying information to obtain credit lines and personal loans, totaling approximately $60,000 without her consent. You agree to assume full liability for these debts immediately." Vanessa made a sound like a wounded animal. "Admit guilt? If we sign that, we are admitting to a crime." "You committed the crime, Mrs. Lawson," Nora said, looking over the rim of her glasses. "This document just keeps the confession civil rather than criminal. If you prefer to plead not guilty, we can do that in front of a jury. I assure you, the video of you assaulting my client will play very well on the court screens." Vanessa shut her mouth, but her eyes were darting around the room, looking for an exit that did not exist. "Item 2, Nora continued. "Restitution. You agree to repay the full principal and interest of the fraudulent loans, as well as the $4,500 transferred from Harper's savings account within 30 days. 30 days? Greg choked out a laugh that sounded more like a cough. "We do not have $60,000 lying around. Nora, you know that. We are illiquid right now. The market—" "We are aware of your liquidity issues," Nora interrupted, "which brings us to item 3, the liquidation of the primary asset." She turned the page. "The single-family residence located at 42 Maplewood Drive will be listed for sale immediately." The silence that followed was total. It was the kind of silence that happens after a car crash, before the screaming starts. "Sale?" Vanessa whispered. Her face went pale beneath her heavy makeup. "You cannot make us sell our house." "Actually, we can." I spoke quietly, but my voice cut through the room. "Mom left her half of that house to me in a trust. Dad, you never bought me out. You just kept living there, pretending it was all yours. Technically, I own 50% of the equity." Greg stared at me. He looked like he had been slapped. He had forgotten. He had spent so many years treating me as an inconvenience that he had forgotten I was actually a legal owner of the roof over his head. "The proceeds from the sale," Nora explained, ignoring the emotional devastation unfolding across the table, "will be used first to satisfy the outstanding mortgage. The remaining equity will then be garnished to pay off the fraudulent debts in Harper's name. After those debts are cleared, the remaining balance will be split according to the ownership deed, 50% to Harper, 50% to you." "You are kicking us out," Vanessa hissed. She stood up, her chair scraping violently against the floor. "You ungrateful, vicious little snake. We gave you a home. We gave you a family. And you are throwing us on the street?" "Sit down, Mrs. Lawson," Nora said. Her voice did not rise, but it hardened. "Or I call the police right now." Vanessa trembled, vibrating with rage, but she sat. I looked at her. I did not feel the sting of her insults anymore. "I am not throwing you on the street. Vanessa," I said, "I am liquidating an asset to pay for the lifestyle you stole from me. You bought Logan a Land Rover. You went to Aspen. You bought designer clothes. You spent my future. Now, you are paying for it with the only thing you have left. That is how debt works." I glanced at Logan. He was sitting very still, staring at the polished table. He was putting it together, the car, the tuition, the limitless spending money. He had thought they were rich. He had thought his mother was a financial wizard. Now he realized he had been driving a car paid for by his stepsister's stolen credit rating. He looked sick. He did not look at me. He could not. "Item 4, Nora said, moving on relentlessly. "The insurance policy." Greg's head snapped up. "No," he said, "absolutely not. That is for my retirement." "It is Mom's life insurance policy," I said. "The one she took out for me. The one you were supposed to transfer to me when I turned 25. I was holding it for you, Greg shouted. To protect it. You would have wasted it. You borrowed against it. Dad, I said, I saw the statements Mark pulled. You have been treating it like a piggy bank. Nora tapped the paper. The agreement requires you to transfer the full ownership and beneficiary status of the policy to Harper immediately, along with a cash payment equivalent to any amount you have borrowed against it. This is robbery, Vanessa screamed. She was crying now, ugly, mascara-stained tears. You are stripping us bare. I am taking back what is mine, I said. Nora leaned forward. Her demeanor shifted from procedural to predatory. Let us be very clear about the alternative, she said. If you do not sign this document, right here, right now, Harper walks out that door. I pick up the phone and call Detective Miller at the Denver Police Department. He is expecting my call. She looked at Greg. You will be arrested for identity theft and wire fraud. Because of the amount, over $100,000 in total damages, you are looking at a Class 3 felony. You will lose the house anyway to pay for your criminal defense attorneys. You will go to prison, and when you get out, you will still owe Harper the money. She looked at Vanessa. And you, Mrs. Lawson, you will be charged as an accomplice and a co-conspirator. You will also be charged with assault. How do you think your friends at the country club will react when they see your mugshot on the evening news? Vanessa flinched as if she had been struck. The social shame. That was the only currency she truly valued. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The air conditioner hummed. I could hear Greg's ragged breathing. You are destroying this family, Greg whispered. He looked at me with eyes that were red and pleading, trying one last time to manipulate the daughter he thought he knew. Think about what you are doing. Harper, the scandal, the shame. We will be the talk of the town. Is this what you want? To humiliate your father? Do you think this will make you happy? I looked at him. I looked at the man who had taught me to ride a bike, and then taught me that love was a transaction. I looked at the man who had watched his wife slap me and told me I deserved it. I am not trying to be happy. Dad, I said, I am trying to be free. But we are family, he croaked. I shook my head slowly. No, I said, a family does not steal from each other. A family does not open credit cards in their child's name. A family does not slap their daughter when she asks for her own money back. You are not my family. You are my debtors, and I am calling in the loan. I am saving the only family I have left, I added, my voice steady. Myself. Greg stared at me for a long time. He looked for the crack in my armor. He looked for the hesitation. He found none. Give me the pen, he whispered. No, Greg. Vanessa grabbed his arm. Do not sign it. Shut up, Vanessa, Greg snapped. He pulled his arm away violently. It is over. Do not you see? It is over. He took the heavy fountain pen Nora offered him. His hand was shaking so badly the pen tip scratched against the paper. He signed his name. It was a jagged, broken scrawl. He pushed the paper to Vanessa. Sign it, he said. I will not, she sobbed. Sign it, he roared, or I will testify against you myself to stay out of jail. Vanessa froze. She looked at her husband with pure hatred. Then she looked at me. You will pay for this, she hissed. Her voice was low and venomous. You think you have won? You have no one. You are going to die alone with your money. Karma is going to get you. Harper. Nora spoke without looking up from the document. That threat has been noted and recorded. Mrs. Lawson, I would advise you to sign before I add a harassment clause to the filing. Vanessa snatched the pen. She signed her name with aggressive, sharp strokes, tearing the paper slightly. She threw the pen down on the granite table. It clattered loudly. There is one final clause, Nora said, retrieving the document and checking the signatures. A no-contact order. She turned the page to the final addendum. Neither of you is permitted to contact Harper Lawson by phone, email, text, or social media. You are not permitted to approach her place of residence or her place of employment. You are not permitted to use third parties to contact her. Any violation of these terms will be considered a breach of this settlement, and the original criminal complaints will be filed immediately. Do we understand? Nora asked. Greg did not look up. He just nodded, his head hanging low. Vanessa glared at me, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. We have nothing to say to her anyway. She is dead to us. Good, I said. Then it should be easy to follow. Logan stood up. He had not said a word. He looked at the signed document, then at his mother, then at me. He started. Don't, I said, just don't. He nodded, swallowed hard, and walked out of the room without waiting for his parents. Greg stood up slowly, like an old man with bad knees. He did not look at me again. He walked to the door, his posture defeated. Vanessa followed him, clutching her purse, her heels clicking on the floor, a sound that used to terrify me, but now just sounded like a retreat. The door closed behind them. The click of the latch was the loudest sound in the world. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, Nora let out a breath and closed the folder. It is done, she said. The house goes on the market Monday. I will have the lien regarding the debt recorded by the end of the business day. They cannot sell it or refinance it without paying you first. I sat there, staring at the empty chairs where my tormentors had just been. I waited for the crash. I waited for the guilt to come rushing back, for the little girl inside me to start crying because she had just orphaned herself. But the crash didn't come. Instead, I felt a physical sensation in my chest. It felt like a tight metal band, one that had been constricting my breathing for 15 years, had suddenly snapped. I took a deep breath. The air in the conference room was recycled and sterile, but it tasted sweet. Are you okay? Nora asked, watching me closely. I looked at my hands. They weren't shaking anymore. I thought I would feel sad, I said, my voice quiet. I thought I would feel like I lost something. You did, Nora said. You lost a tumor. I stood up and walked to the window. Denver was spread out below me, covered in white snow. Somewhere down there, in a car I knew they couldn't afford. Greg and Vanessa were driving back to a house that was no longer theirs, to a life that was finally crumbling under the weight of their own lies. I checked my phone. The crypto app was still running in the background. The numbers were still climbing. I didn't need them. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their permission to exist. I turned back to Nora. Send the paperwork for the house sale, I said. And Nora? Yes. When the check for the insurance policy comes through, buy yourself the most expensive bottle of champagne you can find. Nora grinned. The shark smile was gone, replaced by something genuine. I will put it on the bill, she said. I walked out of the office. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, cutting off the view of the legal battlefield, I realized I wasn't just walking away from a lawsuit. I was walking away from a lifetime of being the victim. I was Harper Lawson. I was 30 years old. I was debt-free. And for the first time in my life, I was entirely, completely, wonderfully alone. The wooden post of the for sale sign was hammered into the frozen front lawn of 42 Maplewood Drive 3 days after the meeting in Nora's office. It stood there like a tombstone marking the death of the Lawson family myth. I did not go to see it myself, but in the suburbs, news travels faster than light. My phone lit up with texts from old neighbors and high school acquaintances who had not spoken to me in years, all feigning concern but really just hunting for gossip. Saw the sign up at your dad's place. Mrs. Higgins from down the street texted, "Is everything okay?" Greg told my husband at the block party that his consulting business was booming. I deleted the message without replying. Let them wonder. Let Greg explain why a man booming with success was panic selling his primary residence in the middle of February. The sale happened with the brutal efficiency of a market that did not care about memories. The house was staged, listed, and under contract within 3 weeks. It turns out, a 4-bedroom colonial in a good school district sells itself, regardless of the toxic drama that had seeped into the drywall. When the closing email arrived from the title company, I was sitting at my desk at Northline Analytics. It was a Tuesday. The subject line was simply, "Escrow closed. Distribution statement attached." I opened the PDF. It was a wall of numbers, but I went straight to the bottom line. The mortgage was paid off, the realtor fees were deducted, and then there was the line item that made my breath catch in my throat. Settlement of debts. Harper Lawson. The $60,000 in fraudulent loans? Gone. The maxed out credit cards? Zeroed out. The $4,500 stolen from my savings? Restored. Nora had set it up so the money never even touched Greg or Vanessa's hands. The title company acted as the executioner, slicing off my pound of flesh before my father could even see the check. I logged into my credit monitoring app. For years, looking at my score had been a source of low-level anxiety, a number that hovered in the mediocre range no matter how hard I worked. I refreshed the page. The wheel spun for a second. 780. It was a jump of nearly 150 points. It was the score of a person who was trustworthy, a person who was stable. 2 days later, I received a call from my own bank. Not a fraud alert this time, but a relationship manager. "Ms. Lawson," he said, his voice smooth and professional. "We noticed a significant positive change in your debt-to-income ratio. We would like to invite you to apply for our pre-approval program for premium mortgage products. You would qualify for the lowest tier of interest rates." I almost laughed. 6 months ago, I couldn't get a lease on a decent car without a cosigner. Now, they were throwing money at me. "I do not need a cosigner?" I asked, just to hear him say it. "Absolutely not," he replied. "Your financials are impeccable." Impeccable. It was a word nobody had ever used to describe me. I hung up the phone and looked out the window at the Denver skyline. The sun was reflecting off the glass towers, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged in one of them. Greg and Vanessa did not fare as well. The distribution of the remaining equity left them with far less than they expected. After the mortgage, the fees, and paying me back every cent they stole plus interest, the nest egg they thought they were sitting on had turned into a handful of dust. They moved out on a Saturday. I knew this because Logan told me. They couldn't afford to stay in the neighborhood. They couldn't even afford the next town over. They ended up in a rental complex called The Pines, which was a generous name for a collection of beige stucco buildings near the industrial park, 40 minutes south of the city. There was no guest room. There was no home office for Greg's imaginary consulting firm. There was just a 2-bedroom apartment with thin walls and a view of a parking lot. I did not stalk them, but the information trickled in. In the age of social media, silence speaks volumes. Vanessa, who used to post daily photos of her garden or her luncheons, went dark. Then, a mutual acquaintance mentioned seeing her working the register at a high-end kitchenware store in the mall. She was not shopping. She was wearing the uniform apron. She was scanning barcodes for the women she used to drink wine with. Greg was having a harder time. He had tried to get back into sales, applying for director-level roles, but the settlement agreement, while civil, had triggered flags in the background checks for financial sector jobs. Or maybe it was just that he was a 60-year-old man who hadn't closed a real deal in 5 years and reeked of desperation. He was unemployed, sitting in a small apartment, with no house to leverage and no daughter to bleed. I felt a phantom pang of guilt, a remnant of my old programming. But then I looked at my bank account. I looked at the peace I had woken up with every single morning since the signing, and the guilt evaporated like mist. Logan reached out a month after the move. He asked to meet for coffee. I agreed, but I chose the place, a bustling cafe downtown, near my office, neutral ground, public, safe. He looked different. The expensive haircut was grown out and messy. He was wearing a jacket I recognized, but it looked worn. He didn't order anything. "I am sorry," he said. He stared at his hands, wrapped around a glass of water. "I didn't know it was that bad. Harper, I knew they borrowed money from you sometimes, but I didn't know about the loans. I didn't know about the cards." I took a sip of my latte. "You knew I paid for your tuition. Logan, you knew I paid for your car insurance. You saw me driving a rust bucket while you drove a Land Rover. You are not stupid. You just chose not to look because it benefited you." He flinched. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. "Yeah, he whispered. "You are right." He looked up at me. His eyes were tired. "It is hell at the apartment," he said. "Dad just sits in front of the TV drinking. Mom screams at him about money all night. She blames you. You know, she says you tricked them." "I didn't trick anyone," I said calmly. "I just stopped playing the game." "I know," Logan said. "I got a job, waiting tables. It sucks. I moved out last week. I'm crashing on a friend's couch until I can afford a room." He hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. "I just wanted to say, I miss you. You are my sister. Can we just start over?" He looked like a lost puppy. For a second, I wanted to reach across the table and hug him. I wanted to tell him I would help him with his first month's rent. I wanted to fix it. But then I remembered the video. I remembered him sitting on the couch, watching his mother slap me, and doing nothing. I set my cup down. "I accept your apology, Logan," I said, "and I'm glad you are working. It is good for you." I paused. "But we are not going to be the family we were. I am not your safety net anymore. If you want to have a relationship with me, it has to be as two independent adults. I will not give you money. I will not hear complaints about Mom and Dad. And I will not be the person you call when things get hard. You have to figure this out on your own." Logan looked at me, searching for the pushover he used to know. He didn't find her. "Okay," he said softly. "I understand." He stood up. He didn't try to hug me. He just nodded and walked out into the busy street, watching him go. I realized that was the first time I had ever respected him. With the past firmly behind me, I turned to the future. The Aurora chain investment had stabilized. It wasn't shooting up 10,000% anymore, but it held its value. It was a significant war chest. I took a portion of the profits, enough to make me nervous, but not enough to ruin me if I lost it, and put a down payment on a condo in the Golden Triangle district. It was on the 16th floor. It had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked west, toward the mountains. The day I got the keys, I walked into the empty living room. The floors were polished concrete. The kitchen was white marble. It was cold, modern, and utterly mine. There was no smell of cinnamon pine cones. There was no clutter of a life that wasn't mine. I stood by the window and watched the sunset turn the Rockies into a silhouette of purple and gold. I had bought this view with the money they said was gambling. I had secured this loan with the credit score they had tried to destroy. But there was one last thing I needed to do. I called Dr. Emily. "I want to do something with the extra money." I told her during our session, "I do not want to just hoard it. That feels like them." "What did you have in mind?" she asked. I established the Phoenix Fund. It wasn't a massive charity, just a small legal defense fund managed by Nora Calder's firm. Its purpose was specific: to provide legal consultations and forensic accounting services for young adults who were victims of familial financial abuse. I put $50,000 into it. It was the exact amount I would have spent on the family obligations over the next 2 years if I hadn't cut them off. Emily smiled when I told her. "You are closing the circle," she said. "You are taking the trauma and turning it into a shield for someone else. That is what healing looks like." Harper. It is not just about surviving. It is about changing the landscape so the next person does not have to fight as hard as you did. I like that. A shield. That night, I sat on the floor of my new condo, eating takeout from a box. It was pad thai, spicy and hot. I didn't have a dining table yet. I didn't have a sofa. But as I sat there, listening to the hum of the city below, I realized I had everything I needed. My phone buzzed. I glanced at it, expecting a work email. It was a notification from the crypto exchange, a small uptick in the market. I smiled and put the phone face down. I didn't need to check it every 5 minutes anymore. The frantic desperation was gone. I was not a walking wallet. I was not a retirement plan. I was not an ungrateful daughter. I took a bite of my dinner, looking at the snow-capped peaks in the distance. I was just Harper, and for the first time in 30 years, that was enough. The snow was falling over Denver again, just like it had exactly 1 year ago. But tonight, I was not watching it through the frosted window of a suburban house that smelled of fake cinnamon and real desperation. I was watching it drift past the floor-to-ceiling glass of my own living room on the 16th floor of the Omni Tower. The city lights below were a grid of amber and white, blinking through the flurry like diamonds scattered on black velvet. Inside, the air did not smell of tension. It smelled of rosemary roasted chicken, expensive red wine, and the faint, sweet scent of a real Fraser fir tree standing in the corner. It was a small tree, decorated not with color-coordinated glass orbs meant to impress the neighbors, but with mismatched ornaments gifted by the people sitting around my dining table. This was my Christmas party. There were no parents here to demand a performance review of my life. There was no stepmother eyeing my coat pocket for cash. There was just Maddie, who was currently laughing so hard she was nearly spilling her drink. There were two of my favorite colleagues from Northline Analytics, data nerds, who appreciated a good spreadsheet as much as a good joke, and there was Sarah, a woman I had met in the survivor support group the Phoenix Fund had helped launch. I looked around the table. We were eating off plates I had bought myself, drinking wine I had chosen because I liked the taste, not the price tag. The conversation flowed easily, jumping from plans for a hiking trip in the spring to a debate about the best sci-fi movies of the decade. Nobody asked me how much money I made. Nobody hinted that they had a bill they could not pay. For the first time in my adult life, I was sitting at a dinner table where the only thing being exchanged was genuine affection. My phone, sitting face down on the marble kitchen island, buzzed. It was a long, sustained vibration that usually signaled an emergency. I excused myself and walked over to it. I picked it up, expecting a work email or perhaps a belated holiday greeting. It was a notification from my crypto portfolio app. Aurora Chain, AUR, listed on Global Exchange. Trading volume, high. Price action, parabolic. I tapped the screen. The graph that loaded looked like a rocket launch. The infrastructure project I had bet on, the one Vanessa had called a gambling addiction for idiots, had just been adopted by a major international trading platform. The liquidity had exploded instantly. I looked at the total balance. The numbers were dizzying. In the span of a single dinner, my net worth had jumped by another 40%. I stared at the figure. A year ago, seeing a number like that would have made me hyperventilate. I would have been terrified that someone would find out, that someone would try to take it away from me. But tonight, I just smiled. It was a calm, quiet smile. The money was not a lifeline anymore. It was just a score in a game I had already won. As I was about to lock the screen, an email banner slid down from the top. It was from Nora Calder. The subject line read, "Final disposition, State Vi, Vanessa Lawson." I opened it right there in the kitchen, the sounds of laughter fading into the background. Harper. The email read, "I wanted you to know before it hit the public records. The district attorney accepted the plea deal this afternoon. Vanessa has pleaded guilty to 1 count of felony identity theft and 1 count of fraud. In exchange for avoiding prison time, she has received 5 years of strict probation and 400 hours of community service." I scrolled down. Here is the kicker. Nora wrote, "Part of her community service is mandatory participation in the state's financial literacy outreach program. She has to go into community centers and give talks on the devastating impact of financial abuse on families. She has to stand in front of strangers and admit exactly what she did to you, over and over again, for the next 2 years. I thought you would appreciate the poetic justice." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Vanessa, the woman who cared more about her image than her soul, was now legally mandated to tell the world she was a predator. It was a punishment far worse than a jail cell for a woman like her. It was public humiliation, codified by the state. I put the phone down, feeling a sense of finality settle in my chest. The war was officially over. The treaty was signed. The enemy was disarmed. Then the phone rang. It was not a notification this time. It was a call. The screen lit up with a number I did not have saved, but the area code was familiar. It was the landline from the cheap apartment complex where they lived now. I stared at the screen, known. Caller. I knew it was Greg. It was Christmas Eve. He was probably sitting in that small apartment, listening to the silence, remembering the big house, the big tree, the daughter he used to command. He was calling to see if the line was still open. He was calling to see if guilt still worked. My thumb hovered over the red button. A year ago, I would have answered. I would have listened to him cry. I would have tried to fix it. I looked back at the table. Maddie was pouring more wine for Sarah. My friends were safe. I was safe. I pressed the decline button. I did not block the number. I just declined the call. It was not an act of anger. It was an act of indifference. He was a ghost, and I stopped believing in hauntings a long time ago. A moment later, a text message pinged. I braced myself for a nasty message from Vanessa, or a guilt trip from Greg. But it was from Logan. Merry Christmas. Harper. The text read, I am in my own place. It is a studio, and it smells like old soup, but I pay the rent myself. I am working double shifts at the restaurant. I'm trying to be a decent person. I know I do not deserve a reply, but I just wanted to tell you that you were right about everything. If you ever want to grab coffee again, the offer stands. If not, I get it. Be happy. I read the message twice. It was honest. There was no ask, no link to a GoFundMe, no request for a loan, just an update. I did not reply immediately. Trust was a currency I could no longer afford to spend recklessly, but I did not delete the message. I left it there, a small, cracked door that maybe, just maybe, could be nudged open in a year or two, but it would be on my terms. I walked back to the table. Everything okay? Maddie asked, looking at my face. You look like you just saw a ghost and then decided it wasn't scary. Something like that, I said, picking up my glass. The crypto market just had a good night, and I just got the email from Nora. Vanessa is going to be spending her weekends teaching ethics classes. The table erupted in laughter. It was a rich, satisfied sound. Cheers to that, Maddie shouted, raising her glass. Wait, if your crypto just went up again, are you going to buy this whole building? I looked around the condo. I looked at the clean lines, the sturdy walls, the space that was entirely mine. No, I said softly. I do not need the building. I looked at Maddie, then at the others. I just need enough to make sure nobody can ever put a price tag on my freedom again. And I have that. I walked over to the sliding glass door and stepped out onto the balcony. The wind was biting, carrying the sharp scent of snow and pine. I wrapped my arms around myself, but I wasn't cold. I looked down at the city, somewhere out there, in the dark. Greg and Vanessa were living the life they had earned, and here, in the light, I was living the life I had fought for. I remembered the girl standing in the foyer with a stinging cheek, holding an empty pocket, feeling small and stupid. I wanted to reach back through time and tell her it was going to be okay. I wanted to tell her that the slap was not the end. It was the wake-up call. I turned back to the room. I walked into my bedroom. I opened the small, fireproof safe bolt to the floor of my closet. I took the hardware wallet out of my pocket. It was just a small piece of plastic and metal, but it held the weight of a new life. I did not hide it inside a book. I did not bury it in a shoebox. I placed it on the velvet shelf of the safe, right next to the deed to my condo and the copy of the restraining order. I am in charge, I whispered to the empty closet. I closed the safe. The lock clicked with a solid, mechanical sound. Secure. I walked back out to the party. My family, my real family, was waiting for me. There was pie to be eaten. There were stories to be told. There was a whole life to be lived. I sat down at the head of the table. 1 year ago, I was a walking wallet in a house of thieves. I thought, looking at the smiling faces around me. Tonight, I am the CEO of my own existence, and the best part is, business is booming. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Harper's journey. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of justice and resilience, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.